Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society. We did a video a while back on historians' pet peeves for July 1st, and we did a video for historians' pet peeves on July 2nd. So we thought we should do a historian pet peeves for July 3rd, 1863. You know, most of my personal peeves of the battle come from my 30 years of giving tours at the Gettysburg National Military Park. Recently, someone asked how many people that I've taken over the battlefield. You know, I never really thought about it. I bet you, though, that there are guides on our force that have kept track of every single tour and how many people were on each of the tours. So I recently made an estimate of the number of tours I'd given, the average number of people on a bus, and I was kind of stunned that I have obviously had a few 100,000 people over the battlefield on tours. And I'm not the hardest working tour guide. I'm sure there are guys on our force today that have taken over 1 million people around the battlefield in those years. And you know, that's crazy to me. But of course, most of the people I've taken over the battlefield, the bulk of them were 8th graders. I get a really big kick when someone who was on my tour when they were in 8th grade 20 years ago, you know, visits Gettysburg and tells me about it. So that's really nice. Now, so pet peeves. So usually my pet peeves, as I mentioned, are things that come up frequently. So people ask about them or say things, and you know, it just, I hear it so much, and it bothers me. I think just a couple general things. The fact that the third day's fighting on Culp's Hill is largely ignored in most popular histories of the battle bothers me. I guess it works out better when it's written into the narrative of the second day's battle. You know, the first day was fought north and west of the town, the South won. The second day, the South attacked both ends of the line, and both ends of the line are strong. And then on the third day, they attacked the Union center. But really, there's heavy fighting on Culp's Hill on the morning of the third day of the battle. And because it started early in the morning and went on until late in the morning, it was probably the longest continuous sustained action of the entire battle. And eventually, the Northern Army is successful and the South is driven off of Culp's Hill. I'm sure some of our Culp's Hill aficionados would like me to point out that the 12th Army Corps involved in that action had been shipped off to the Western Theater after the Battle of Gettysburg, and General Meade did not receive the official reports from the 12th Corps until largely after he had written his official report. So there's a lack of acknowledgement as to the 12th Corps' fighting in General Meade's official report, and that probably is one of the reasons for the lack of notoriety. Also, they're fighting in the woods, and the men involved can only see a short distance around them because of the woods, and it's not like other areas of the field saw what was going on over there, so their story is not known as well or told in many of the early histories. Another thing that bothers me is this idea that Pickett's charge was a well-planned assault, and it was well thought out. And, you know, it seems to me when you read all the accounts that we have from the various participants, that on the morning of the third day, Lee really wanted to attack both ends of the northern line again, as he had on July 2nd. And he was moving troops into position to make those attacks. But those attacks failed during the morning hours of July 3rd. And it wasn't until after those attacks failed that Lee, Robert E. Lee, started to plan what would become known as Pickett's Charge. And he basically threw this thing together at the last moment. So it definitely was not something that he had been planning since the night before. And I think some of the execution of the plan shows that it was hastily thrown together. Also, you know, people have this idea that there's something else Lee could have done on July 3rd. And to me, I don't know, it seems very simple. Robert E. Lee makes this massive assault against Cemetery Ridge on July 3rd, or he retreats back over the Army and leaves Gettysburg. I don't see a lot of other options here that are available to him. I don't think there's any way that the Southern Army can swing around the Northern Army and get between the Union Army and Baltimore and Washington. They could swing over the mountains, march 30 miles south, recross the mountains into the area of Frederick, Maryland. But there's really no way to swing around them. And I think Lee realizes this. If he starts his army on the retreat, that's it. They're retreating. And he doesn't want to do that. Lee wants to attack the Union Army, and this is what makes sense, this massive charge. I just don't see a lot of other options that are available to him. Now, also, I think it's interesting that people suggest that Pickett's charge was close to breaking through. And I think this is, we have done this over the years for dramatic purposes. You know, the Southern Army come charging across the field, they cross the Emmitsburg Road, they get up near the angle, they break through the line. And then, you know, the Union Army overwhelms them and they're driven back. And they make it appear as if it's really close. And you know what? The charge was not that close at all. The charge was a disaster, and you know, as they were coming across the field, they were just torn apart, and I don't see any chance of success for this charge. And even as the Southern Army is breaking through, reinforcements are coming from Culp's Hill and down along Cemetery Ridge, and they are heading towards the Union Center. And large amounts of reinforcements for the Northern Army reach the Union Center after the charge is ended. And I just don't see it as being that close. Of course, there's also this idea that is put forth by a lot of people that what occurred in Pickett's charge was not Lee's real battle plan, that Lee had another plan, and people let him down. And if what he really envisioned for the charge would have happened, it would have been more successful. And I don't buy any of this at all. I think one thing that people from the outside might have trouble understanding about you know, a field of study such as the Gettysburg battlefield is we have a basic framework of knowledge about what happened here. Yes, there are many things we don't know about the battle, and there are many missing pieces, and historians argue about you know, whether you know, there was this perspective or that perspective. There's some debate involved in the source material that we have. But there is a framework of knowledge, and it really irritates me. This is a pet peeve. When people go outside of that framework and interject just crazy theories or theories that are outside the box and that have no real substance. Like, Lee wasn't aiming for Cemetery Ridge. He was aiming for Ziegler's Grove. No evidence whatsoever. How about Jeb Stuart wasn't just riding around behind the Union lines to take some of the pressure off of the Union cavalry attacks against the Southern rear. No, he was riding around so he could hit the rear of Cemetery Ridge the same time Pickett's division was hitting the front of Cemetery Ridge. Absolutely no facts to substantiate that in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't stop people from promoting this idea or writing whole books about this subject. And it's just very, very irritating. So I'll be on a tour, given a tour, and someone has read one of these, alternative histories of the battle and brings these things up. And then you have to explain them. And, that one, for instance, the Union veterans who fought at East Cavalry Field 3 miles east of Gettysburg, at the time that they were trying to get the federal government interested in preserving that field and getting them interested in monuments being placed on East Cavalry Field, really pushed this idea that Jeb Stuart's mission in the Union rear was more than it was, and really started to promote the idea that they were on their way to hit the Union center from the rear. And so this is not something that people invented recently. It's an old argument. It's just, again, we have no evidence that that was Jeb Stuart's mission. The other thing about it that's fascinating is these people who promote this idea make it sound as if it's a clear path from East Cavalry Field to the Union rear. I'd have trouble today in a car getting there from one area to the other in like 20 minutes. And yet, there's all kinds of wild speculations how Jeb Stuart would have gotten there in that amount of time. Along those lines, I wanted to mention that Pickett's charge itself, the title, it's called Pickett's Charge. George Edward Pickett committed about 5,000 Virginians in the attack. But the whole attack was like 12,000 men, and included men from other states, like a large amount of North Carolinians. And it's fascinating to me that it was coined, the term Pickett's Charge was coined right after the battle, mostly by Virginia newspaper correspondents that actually witnessed the charge. So that's something in itself. And some of this stuff, I wouldn't fight against it if I was you. When I first became a tour guide, I determined that I would never call it Pickett's Charge. So I went out of my way to describe Longstreet's assault. And I remember several times, maybe let's say the first 10 times I gave a tour of the battlefield, I called it Longstreet's assault. And every single time, someone said, yeah, that's nice, but where was Pickett's Charge? And so nowadays, if I write about Pickett's Charge, I'll put it in quotes. Or if I talk about it, sometimes I'll do air quotes, Pickett's Charge. And that makes me feel better. And then a couple last things here. 51,000 casualties. That has always really bothered me. Why do we say 51,000 casualties? We're estimating. And we know that there were not exact figures of killed, wounded, captured, or missing. So if we're estimating, who would estimate 51,000? Why not say 50,000 casualties? 50,000 men were killed or wounded or captured or missing in the battle, and leave it at that. Leave that 1,000 off. I know that's a very small pet peeve. And then, of course, the bigger one is almost everyone who comes here thinks 50,000 men were killed in the battle. 50,000 men were killed or wounded or captured or missing, not killed. Why can't they get that other stuff straight? If I had to guess, I would say 5,000 men were killed in the battle. And maybe another 5,000 men died in the hospitals around the town afterwards. But it's not 50,000 killed. It's 50,000 killed, wounded, captured, or missing. Or go ahead, 51,000 killed or wounded or captured or missing. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was the underappreciation of General Meade as the victor at Gettysburg. You know, and again, I'm talking from 30 years of taking people around the battlefield on a tour. And most people have never even heard of General Meade. And the ones that have heard of him, when we get to the end of the tour, all they know about General Meade was he did not pursue the Confederate Army and did not destroy the Confederate Army when he had the opportunity after the Battle of Gettysburg, and he was fired after the battle because of it, and General Grant came in and took command of the Union Army. And it's just frustrating. And I think that's probably why a lot of tour guides promote General Meade and try to get people to understand what a good job he did during the fighting. So first of all, he did pursue the Confederate Army. It's just that, consider this, General Meade had just gotten his job a few days before the battle, on the morning of June 28th, 1863. He had, in the Battle of Gettysburg, he lost more men than any other American army had ever lost in any battle, in any war. And he won. And people are criticizing him because he can't get his army together and move quickly enough to stop Robert E. Lee. And then here's the other thing. Robert E. Lee retreats very quickly. He's out of here. I would submit this. Robert E. Lee doesn't want to surrender. How about that? And of course, you know, you already know that I believe that General Meade did an excellent job at the Battle of Gettysburg. And there's just no way to force the Southern Army to surrender after the battle. If you think it was so easy, let's talk to some of the Grant people. How come Grant did not force Lee to surrender after the Battle of the Wilderness? How come he didn't go after him, just tell him to, you know, surrender? How come it took him a year of just beating on Robert E. Lee's army to force him to surrender? Because it just doesn't happen the way people imagine that it could have happened after the Battle of Gettysburg. And of course, you know, I think the idea that Grant replaced Meade comes into play a lot in people's mind, simply because that's a popular narrative of the war, that there's just one general in charge of all the armies after another, that there was Irvin McDowell at First Bull Run, and then George McClellan, and you know, John Pope, and Burnsides, and Hooker, and Meade, and then Grant. You know, it's a simple progression, but it's not so simple. Like Irving McDowell, McClellan didn't take over for Irving McDowell. He created a different army, and they were both active at the same time. And John Pope is active at the same time as McClellan. And Meade commands the Army of the Potomac, and Grant is overall commander of the armies. It's very complicated, and I think that's the reason why people want to make it more simple and just make it a simple succession from Meade to Grant. But I tell you what, Meade commanded the Army of the Potomac at the end of the war, and he was there in Washington, D.C. during the Victory Parade. If you like the content we've been putting on our YouTube channel, please hit the like and subscribe.